The sun had not yet risen above the roof of the old house when Martha got up. She walked slowly to the kitchen, her robe tied at the waist and her grey hair held by a small clip. Her wrinkled hands carefully lit the fire, and the kettle was already waiting next to her favorite cup, white with a lilac flower in the center. As the water heated, she set the table with precision, even though it was just for herself. That routine was all that remained of her former life, the one before the silence. "Today will be a long day like all the others since you've been gone," she murmured while placing the tea bag in the cup. "But I'm still here, as I promised I would be." Leonard entered the kitchen shortly after, adjusting his shirt cuffs with his long, firm fingers. His dark grey hair was meticulously combed, and his serious expression accompanied his cold, attentive eyes. He didn't smile. He never smiled in the morning. He walked straight to the table, grabbed a piece of bread and served himself as he did every day without a kind word. Martha merely observed as always. "You woke up early," she commented softly. He replied without raising his eyes. "I woke up at the right time. Some of us don't live in the past." She sighed, resting her elbows on the table. "Some of us live on longing." Later, Martha stood for long minutes by the window. She observed the sounds of the street with teary eyes. Children ran freely, playing with loud and carefree voices. She pressed her fingers against the window frame, trying to hold back the wave of memories that came like a tide. She saw with vivid memory her small son holding a colorful toy, trying to speak his first words. That moment was frozen in time. "It was the last time I heard your voice, my love," she thought silently. "You disappeared so suddenly that I never learned to live without the sound of your footsteps." Leonard returned to the kitchen after a while. He took his wallet from the high cabinet and checked his wristwatch with precision. He put on his coat with exact movements and walked to the front door. "I have to resolve some banking matters this afternoon," he informed directly. Martha remained standing at the window without turning around. "You always have something to resolve except what matters." He stopped at the door and looked over his shoulder. "What matters now is moving forward. Too much time has passed." She spoke softly, as if talking to herself. "Too much time for someone who hasn't lost a piece of their own body." The clock in the living room marked mid-afternoon. Martha sat on the sofa and looked at the ceiling, as if waiting for an answer to fall from there. The street noise came weakly through the window cracks. Nothing was different that day, and yet everything seemed about to change. She picked up her diary again and wrote a single line at the end of the page. "Today, it's been 18 years." She closed the notebook, stood up and went to the kitchen preparing a new tea. The smell of mint filled the air. "If he's somewhere out there, maybe he's thinking of me right now," she said quietly. "Maybe he still remembers my voice." Before we begin, comment where you're watching this story from and subscribe to the channel to keep following along. On the other side of town, Noah woke up to the sound of hurried footsteps in the hallway. The room was small, with 2 iron beds and an old dresser, shared between him and another boy who was still sleeping. Sunlight came through the thin curtains and striped the wooden floor. He sat on the bed with his elbows on his knees, breathing deeply. This wasn't just any morning. It was the day he turned 18. The day that, for a long time, he thought would bring some change, some answer. But it seemed just like any other ordinary day in that stuffy orphanage. 18 years, and still here inside, he thought bitterly. I don't know if I'm happy or if I feel more lost than ever. Shortly after breakfast, while everyone was heading to the courtyard, Evelyn appeared at the dining hall door. Her eyes were tired, her face marked by subtle wrinkles, and her dark hair firmly tied back. She made a quick nod and pointed to the hallway. Noah immediately understood that this was different. She wasn't the type of woman who drew attention for no reason. He walked with her to a small room at the back of the building, a room he had never entered before. Evelyn locked the door from the inside, closed the blinds, and pulled a cardboard box from under a chair. "Sit down, Noah. What I'm going to tell you might change everything." He frowned but obeyed. "You're scaring me, Evelyn. What's happening?" She sat across from him and pushed the box in his direction. His eyes began to shine and his voice lost the firmness that always characterized it. "I've waited for this day for a long time. I kept everything here. Everything I managed to get, everything they let me take." Noah opened the box slowly. Inside were old photographs, yellowed documents, and paper clippings that looked like registration forms. Evelyn touched one of the papers with trembling fingers. You weren't left here by accident, Noah. You were brought by a man who claimed your mother had died. But he lied. He froze. Lied? What do you mean by that? They always told me that she was dead. Evelyn shook her head and wiped her eyes before continuing. She's alive. She looked for you for years, Noah. Every year she came back here, asked, begged, but they never let her reach you. And I couldn't do anything. I was threatened. I received money to keep quiet. But today, now that you're of age, no one can stop me anymore. He pushed his chair back and stood up, not knowing where to look. His heart was beating fast. His throat felt tight. Who did this to me? Who was this man? Evelyn took a deep breath. A man named Leonard. He said he was your mother's husband, and that he was taking care of everything after her illness. But she wasn't dead, Noah, and she never stopped looking for you. Noah sat back down, his eyes fixed on the photos. There was an image of a young woman smiling with a baby in her arms. Her expression was sweet, and there was something about that image that made him feel a strange warmth in his chest. He ran his fingers along the edge of the photograph, trying to absorb every detail. Evelyn placed her hand over his. That baby is you, and that woman is your mother. Her name is here, along with an address. I just didn't tell you before because I couldn't. But today you have the right to know. He looked up at her with a mixture of confusion and hope. And why did she never take me out of here? Why didn't anyone help her? Evelyn lowered her head. Because no one wanted to, and because some had a lot to lose if you were found. While the two were talking, the half-open door of the room moved slightly. Director Crowley passed through the hallway and stopped in front of the gap. She heard enough to understand that Evelyn was breaking the silence. Her cold gaze crossed through the opening, and then she continued on her way as if nothing had happened. Evelyn noticed the presence and immediately changed her tone, standing up and collecting the box. You keep this, Noah, but pretend nothing happened. Understood? She's watching. He quickly put away the papers, forcefully pushing the lid onto the box. I'll pretend, for now, but I need to see my mother. I need to know who I am. Noah spent the rest of the day quiet, distant from the others. He sat alone in the courtyard, stayed away from games, and refused the simple cake they prepared for him at dinner. As night fell, he waited for everyone to fall asleep, took the box to his room and began to carefully examine each document. There was an orphanage intake form with Leonard's signature, photos of his mother's house, copies of correspondence, and newspaper clippings that talked about old disappearances. But what struck him most was an old note, written in feminine, trembling handwriting. If anyone reads this, please tell him I never stopped looking. He rested his forehead against the wall and whispered into the darkness. I'm here, Mom. I'm here, and I'll find you. As the night progressed, Noah remained seated on the bed, surrounded by papers. Everything made more sense now. The stories that always sounded cold, the way he never received visits, the lies camouflaged by forced smiles. For years he believed he was just another orphan among many, but now each piece of paper told him otherwise. He looked over the birth certificate. There was the full name. For the first time he knew who he was, and for the first time he had an address. If I hadn't turned 18 today, I would never have known anything, he thought as he folded the paper. This date isn't just my birthday. It's the beginning of my real life. Near dawn, Noah organized everything inside the box and placed it in a backpack. He had to act carefully. He knew the director was vigilant and any misstep could cost dearly. Evelyn was taking risks by telling him the truth, but now there was no going back. He could no longer live without knowing who he was. He looked at the photo of his mother once more, trying to imagine her voice, her smell, the touch of the hands that once cradled him. If she looked for me all these years, then maybe she's still waiting for me. The sky was already gaining light tones when he finally lay down. He couldn't sleep, but kept his eyes closed. Thoughts came in waves, one after another, as if everything he believed was being rewritten in real time. There was no more room for doubts. He knew what he needed to do. Deep in his chest, something pulsed differently. It wasn't fear, it was determination. He gripped the strap of his backpack tightly, like someone holding onto a piece of his own history. I'm going there. I'm going to look her in the eyes, and I'm going to ask why they took me away from her. The sun had barely warmed the sidewalks when Noah got off the bus, with his backpack on his shoulders and his heart beating too loudly for the silence of that street. He walked slowly, his eyes scanning each number on the facades until he found what he was looking for. He stopped on the opposite side of the sidewalk, observing the house carefully. It was exactly like in the old photo, with the well-kept garden, a small bench near the gate, and the symmetrical windows flanked by light curtains. For a few seconds he couldn't move. There, right in front of him, was the place from which he had been torn away as a baby. It's now. I'm seeing it with my own eyes. She might be in there right now, he thought, with his hands sweating inside his pockets. The white fence was open, and the gate had no lock. Noah took 2 steps toward the entrance, but something made him stop. The front door opened, and Martha came out slowly with a cloth bag on her arm and her hair tied in a low bun. She looked to both sides of the street before walking along the sidewalk. Noah couldn't look away. His heart raced so fast that he had to lean against the nearest tree. For the first time he was seeing the woman he had searched for so long. It's her. It's really her. She hasn't changed that much. My God, would she recognize me if she looked at me now? Before he could gather the courage to cross, a dark car parked in front of the house. A man with determined steps, neat clothes, and a hard gaze got out. Noah froze. He immediately recognized that face from the old photos. It was Leonard, the same man who had signed the adoption papers, the same name that appeared on all the documents. The man entered through the front door as if he owned the place. Noah backed away, hiding behind the neighboring wall. His head was burning. So he's still with her. He lied, manipulated, erased my name from history, and still lives with her as if nothing happened. Walking around the house, looking for some way to get in, Noah noticed a small window at the back, almost flush with the ground. It was narrow, but not impossible. He crouched down and peeked in. On the other side, he saw a dark space, filled with stacked boxes, old furniture covered by cloths, and a staircase that led up to a closed door. It was the basement. The glass was dirty but unlocked. Carefully he pushed it, and the noise was muffled by the damp grass around it. He slipped with effort through the narrow gap and fell onto the cold, dusty floor. He coughed softly and remained motionless for a few seconds. Now I'm inside. But what if he finds me? I can't be seen yet. Not now. Time seemed to pass slowly in there. Noah walked among the old objects, breathing cautiously. The darkness was cut only by the beams of light that entered through the cracks in the wood. He crouched in a corner where he could observe the staircase and at the same time stay hidden. Above, he heard firm footsteps crossing the floor of the house, muffled voices, doors opening and closing. Each sound made him hold his breath. He recognized Leonard's voice, firm, always firm. At times he also heard her voice, softer, sweeter. He couldn't understand the words, but the intonations reached him. She's up there. She has no idea. And I'm down here, as if trapped in a time that hasn't ended. The day went by, and he only moved when the silence upstairs indicated safety. He found some boxes with old papers, pushed a small piece of furniture that was blocking the light, and opened up enough space to see part of the room above. From the basement, he could see shadows and hear clearly when Martha spoke to herself. It was strange but comforting. He recognized something familiar in her, a way of walking, a tone in her voice that moved him. His stomach growled, but he ignored it. There was no food there. He was just waiting for the right moment to make contact. I can't leave now. He's still here. I need to find another way to talk to her, without drawing his attention. At the end of the afternoon, the sound of the front door indicated that Leonard had left. Still, Noah didn't move. It was too early to take risks. He began to search through the drawers of an old cabinet and found notebooks, torn envelopes, and loose sheets. Among them, a notepad with some still clean pages. He took one of the sheets and sat down on the floor. He pulled from his backpack a pen that he had brought from the orphanage. He wrote calmly with a steady hand the words he had mentally rehearsed since he entered. Come to the basement alone. He folded the note and held it in his hands for a few seconds. This is the only chance for her to hear me. I need her to read me with her heart. He waited until early evening. The house became quieter and the footsteps grew lighter. By the sound, he knew Martha was walking between rooms, perhaps preparing dinner, When he noticed all lights were off, he slowly climbed up the basement stairs. The door above was closed, but not locked. He carefully opened a small gap, checked if the path was clear, and went out through the side hallway. The lights were off. The clock showed it was almost the end of the night. He walked silently to the front door, knelt down, placed the folded note on the mat, and returned to the basement before any noise could reveal his presence. Now it's time to wait. Wait for her to find it. Wait for her to come. Back in the basement, he sat in the same corner as before, breathing heavily with his eyes fixed on the stairs. He knew this might not work. That perhaps the note would get lost, that she might ignore it, or worse, that Leonard would find it first. But it was a risk he needed to take. He remained there for hours, motionless, listening to every creak of the house as if it were a sign. If she appears, if she comes down, I'll know there's still hope. Martha was turning off the lights in the house one by one, as she did every night. When she saw something unusual on the floor, against the door, she bent down with difficulty, her knees protesting the effort, and picked up the small folded paper. The texture was rough, but the handwriting, though uncertain, carried something deeply familiar. Her eyes fixed on each letter. Come to the basement alone. For a moment she stood motionless with the note caught between her trembling fingers. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from something deeper. This handwriting, it looked so much like his when he was still learning to write, she whispered, feeling her legs weaken. Am I going crazy? Or has the moment I've waited for all these years finally arrived? She walked to the kitchen, took a small old flashlight kept in the drawer, and headed to the basement door. It was dark. The smell of dust intensified as she descended the steps. Each step sounded like an echo of her past. The beam of light trembled as it swept across the space, revealing old boxes, covered furniture, and a figure huddled in the corner, arms around his knees. The young man raised his eyes when he saw her, and something between them recognized each other immediately. Tears flowed silently. Martha covered her mouth with her hands, and her eyes filled with water. My God, it can't be. Is it you? She stammered between sobs. I'm your son, he replied, his voice choked and low, as if saying something that had always been trapped in his chest. She knelt before him, still holding the flashlight, and they stared at each other for long seconds. The emotion was so great that words wouldn't come. Tears flowed without resistance, bodies trembled, but not from fear. Martha touched the young man's face with her fingertips, as if confirming he was real. Noah held her hand tightly, squeezing as one who grasps his own history. She whispered through tears, I looked for you. I never stopped believing. I knew you were alive. And he, squeezing his eyes to hold back tears, replied with effort, I came because I could never live without knowing who you were. In the embrace that followed, past and present united in silence. They cried together, with hearts tight from an old pain that now found relief. Martha didn't want to let go, and Noah felt that, there, he finally had somewhere to belong. However, the sound of firm footsteps approaching down the stairs cut the moment short. They instinctively separated, and the basement door creaked as it opened. Leonard descended the steps calmly, his expression initially confused until he saw the two facing each other, still with red eyes. But what's happening here? He said, feigning surprise with perfection. I don't believe it. It's him. It's our boy. Martha stood up and ran to Leonard, still holding the note, her eyes full of hope. Leonard, it's him. He's back. Our son is here, alive. Leonard looked at Noah with a moved expression and took a few slow steps toward him. The young man remained silent, attentive to every gesture. I don't know how this is possible, but my God, it's a miracle, said Leonard, kneeling before the young man and pretending to hold back tears. After so long, you've returned to us. Noah kept his eyes fixed on him, feeling each word as a calculated lie. He pretends too well. If only she knew, he thought, clenching his teeth inside. But now is not the time. I need to keep playing the game. Leonard placed one hand on Noah's shoulder and looked at Martha. Let's take him upstairs. He needs to eat. He needs to rest. He can't stay in this cold basement, he said with a voice carefully balanced between emotion and authority. Martha nodded, wiping away tears with the back of her hand. Of course. Come, my love. You're going to stay here with us now. Noah stood up slowly, feeling his body still tense, but nodded. Thank you for letting me in, he said, looking into her eyes. I really needed to see you. Leonard took the flashlight from Martha's hands and nodded. Let's go upstairs. This is just the beginning. We still have a lot to understand. In the living room, Martha prepared tea and covered Noah with a blanket on the sofa. The atmosphere was still one of shock, but also of warmth. Leonard sat in an armchair beside him with a discreet smile on his face, observing everything carefully. He spoke little, just enough. Noah avoided prolonging eye contact, but responded politely. Do you remember anything from your childhood? Martha asked, her voice laden with tenderness. A few things, dreams, flashes, but the feeling of being home. I recognized it the moment I saw your face, Noah replied, lightly touching her hand. It's strange, but it's as if I never left this place. Leonard got up and walked to the bookshelf, taking an old photo album. He flipped through it calmly and showed an image of Martha with a baby in her arms. This was you. Look how smiley you were. Your mother was always clinging to you. Noah leaned forward and observed the photo carefully. It was the same one that was among Evelyn's papers. A detail in the corner of the image caught his attention, but he remained calm. I have this photo too, he said naturally. They gave it to me at the place where I grew up. Leonard raised his eyes for a second, then smiled. Then destiny wanted you to find it, one way or another. The night progressed, and Martha insisted that Noah stay. She prepared a small guest room and put clean sheets on the bed. Leonard helped with the pillows and placed a bottle of water on the bedside table. Noah observed each gesture cautiously, aware that there was much behind those appearances. Before closing the door, Martha held her son's hands and looked into his eyes. Now that I've found you, I won't lose you again. Noah smiled gently and squeezed her hands. I didn't come to leave. I just want to recover everything they took from us. Leonard remained in the hallway for a few seconds after the door closed. He walked slowly to his room with rigid shoulders and a thoughtful look. Noah, on the other side, lay down without taking off his shoes. He kept his backpack beside the bed and stared at the ceiling with open eyes. The pieces were beginning to fit together, but there was still much he needed to know. He lied yesterday, he lied today, he'll continue lying. But now I'm inside, and from here, he can't remove me. The silence of the house returned, but in Noah's heart, something finally began to pulse with truth. Tomorrow will be a new day, and I'll use it to understand everything that was hidden from me. On that sunny morning, 2 days after the reunion, Noah came down the stairs of the house wearing clean clothes that Martha had set aside for him. The smell of fresh bread and coffee spread through the kitchen, where she waited for him with a wide smile, stirring something in a pot with agile hands. Since he had started living there, Martha hadn't stopped talking, as if she were in a hurry to recover years of silence. She served his plate with excess, tidied his room with care, and insisted on telling childhood stories that no one else remembered. You always liked porridge in the morning, she said, placing the bowl in front of him. And now that you're here, I want to learn everything I missed. Leonard entered the kitchen shortly after, with controlled steps and his gaze sweeping every corner. He wore the same gentle expression as always, but Noah already noticed how his eyes seemed to examine everything around. He sat naturally at the table, commented on the weather, and asked how Noah had slept. The young man responded politely, keeping attention on every word. Leonard smiled but always asked one more question, a comment that sounded too casual. Do you still have that backpack you brought? I can help wash your things if you want. Noah disguised his discomfort and answered quickly, I've already put everything away, it's all fine. Inside, he knew he needed to hide everything better. During the day, Noah spent more time with Martha. She took him to the greenhouse where she cultivated plants, showed him a cabinet with old toys, and even took out of a chest some little clothes kept for years. She cried between one memory and another, touching objects as if they were alive. He listened to her with respect and affection, but kept part of his mind focused on something else. In each room, he tested the range of the micro-recorder hidden in his pocket. He knew it was risky, but he needed to record what Leonard said when he wasn't being observed. He won't keep this mask on for long, he thought, while helping Martha fold old clothes. And when he slips, I'll be listening. At night, when everyone was in their rooms, Noah always kept his backpack locked and hidden at the back of the closet, with documents protected by plastic and the recorder turned on. One early morning, he woke up to a slight noise in the room. He pretended to remain asleep and heard the sound of the closet door being opened. Through a slit in his eyes, he saw Leonard crouched in front of the clothes, carefully rummaging. The man moved away silently, not realizing he had been noticed. The next morning, Noah acted as if nothing had happened, but when he grabbed his backpack, he noticed the zipper was crooked. He's already started, he thought, gripping the clasp tightly. Now I'm sure he knows I have something. Carefully, Noah wrote a short letter and hid it inside an old book, then put the book in a bag and walked to the nearby square, where Evelyn was already waiting, sitting on a bench, with attentive eyes and a worn-out face. He sat beside her and handed her the bag, without visual contact. Everything is there, photos, copies, recordings, but there's still a lot missing. Evelyn kept her gaze fixed on the ground. You have no idea what this could cost me, Noah. The director has been watching me since that day. If she finds out I'm still in contact with you, I'll lose my job. Noah responded immediately. And if we don't do this now, she and Leonard will erase all the truth. Evelyn hid the bag inside her purse and took a deep breath. Time was running against both of them. She knew she had crossed a line by revealing everything and now lived under constant tension. She stood up with a discreet nod and disappeared among the trees. Noah remained seated for a few more minutes, observing the movements on the street before returning home. Leonard greeted him with the same cordial expression as always, but there was something in the way he looked at the clock that bothered him. Went for a walk alone? I thought today you wanted to rest more, he said with a slight smile. Noah responded naturally. Just went out to breathe a bit. I still need to adapt. I'm not used to so much silence. That same day, late in the afternoon, Evelyn returned to the orphanage with her heart racing. She tried to act naturally, but as soon as she crossed the main corridor, she was called by the director. The woman was standing in front of the office door, with her arms crossed and a contained smile that didn't reach her eyes. We need to talk, she said in a low tone. Evelyn entered without hesitation. The director firmly closed the door and turned with a fixed gaze. You've been distracted, Evelyn, and you know how we value discretion around here. Evelyn kept her face calm, but her stomach was twisting. I'm just tired. Maybe I need a day off. The director walked to the desk, opened a drawer and pulled out an empty folder. I hope that's all it is. Because if I discover you've been revealing old information, it might cost more than a day off. Evelyn left the room without saying anything else, but sweat was running down her back. On the way to her room, she thought about the director's words, the hidden threats, and what would come next. She knew she needed to be more cautious. That night, she locked the copies of the dossier inside a suitcase with a padlock and decided to prepare another version with less content, just enough to protect Noah in case something happened. They're closing in. But I won't stop now, she whispered, looking out the window. If I give up, he'll be alone again, and I won't allow that. Meanwhile, in the room of the house where he now lived, Noah stared at the ceiling and thought about the next recording. The truth is here, and I'm going to extract it, word by word. The morning began calmly, with the usual sound of cutlery in the kitchen, and Martha humming an old melody while cutting fruits. Noah sat at the table with his eyes fixed on the glass of juice, trying to appear relaxed. Leonard entered shortly after, adjusting his shirt sleeves with a measured smile on his face. He sat down next to Martha and began commenting on house documents and some pending bank matters. With studied naturalness, he slid the conversation to the point he wanted. Now that our son is back, I think we should review the inheritance papers. It would be good to have everything organized. Martha looked surprised, but without suspicion. Do you think it's time for that already? Leonard nodded, maintaining a calm tone. Of course, my dear, it would be irresponsible of us not to adjust everything now. From the hallway, with his body pressed against the wall and his cell phone hidden between his hands, Noah recorded everything carefully. Leonard's words didn't sound like family concern, but like control maneuvers. The young man remained motionless, with his heart beating strongly and his eyes narrowed, absorbing every sentence. He knew that conversation wasn't by chance. Leonard had a plan, and now he was beginning to move the pieces. When Martha asked about the clauses in the will, Noah quietly moved away, put his phone away, and went up to his room. He wants everything for himself. He just wants to use my presence to seem generous, but I'm going to dismantle this from the inside. While Noah analyzed the recording in his room, Evelyn faced another reality. At the orphanage, she was called to the director's office for the second time in less than a week. The woman was waiting for her standing, with her arms crossed and an icy expression. Without beating around the bush, she said there was evidence of protocol breach, that Evelyn had inappropriately involved herself with a former resident, and that her presence there was unsustainable. Evelyn tried to argue, but the director gave her no space. "You betrayed the institution's trust. You should have left here years ago." With teary eyes, Evelyn gathered her things in silence. "Fine, I'll leave, but the truth has already left with me, and you can't erase that anymore." Upon returning home with carefully hidden copies of the dossier, Evelyn sat on her bed, holding the papers with trembling hands. She cried silently, not just for the loss of her job, but for the feeling of injustice building in her chest. She knew her life was turning upside down, but she also knew she had done what was right. She stored the documents at the bottom of a locked suitcase and wrote a letter to Noah, informing him about her dismissal and warning him about the increasing danger. "They will tighten the siege, but you are not alone. I am still with you, even from outside." That same night, Noah tried to talk to Martha, too. The two were in the living room, sitting in opposite armchairs, while Leonard pretended to read a newspaper in the kitchen. Noah looked at his mother seriously and began to speak. "Do you really trust him?" "Leonard?" Martha frowned, surprised by the question. "Of course I do, son. He stood by my side all these years. I couldn't have managed alone." Noah took a deep breath and tried to go further. "What if he isn't who he seems to be? If there were things you don't know?" She shook her head and touched his arm. "Don't say that. He took care of me when no one else was here." Noah looked down, frustrated. "Then you're not ready to hear?" "Not yet." Later, while the house slept and darkness took over the hallways, Leonard walked silently to Noah's room. The hallway light was off, and his feet stepped precisely, avoiding making noise. He turned the doorknob slowly and entered the dark room. Noah, lying down, pretended to sleep, but with his eyes slightly open. He observed every movement with his phone in hand, recording everything in absolute silence. Leonard went to the closet, searched among the clothes, and then crouched in front of the backpack. He opened the zipper carefully and began to rummage through things. Noah remained motionless, but anger burned in his chest. "He doesn't give up, wants to know what I know. But now he gives me the proof I needed." After a few minutes, Leonard closed the backpack and left without looking back. Noah released the air he was holding, stopped the recording, and sat up in bed. The night was still half over, but the young man didn't sleep anymore. He spent the rest of the night listening to the audio, analyzing every noise and noting the most suspicious statements. For the first time, he had something concrete. "Now I can prove he's lying. It's not just suspicion, it's truth in sound. And nobody will be able to ignore this." The sky began to lighten, and with it a new certainty was born inside Noah. His time is running out, and mine, to understand everything, is just beginning. The first light of morning had barely touched the kitchen floor when Noah went out the back door, with hurried steps and a firm gaze. The heavy backpack on his shoulders seemed to carry more than documents. It carried 18 years of silence, doubt, and anguish. He walked with his phone in hand, ready to meet Evelyn again. The plan was to see each other quickly, away from prying eyes. When he saw her on the park bench with swollen eyes and slumped shoulders, he didn't say a word. He sat beside her and just extended the device. Evelyn put on the headphones, listened in silence, and at the end of the recording just lowered her head. "It's all there," he said with his eyes fixed on the ground. "Now no one can pretend they didn't know." Evelyn ran her hands over her face and put the phone in her bag like someone holding a rare jewel. She began to sort through the papers she had already prepared: copies, dates, comparisons, files, and statements. There was the structure of a strong dossier, capable of exposing each of Leonard's movements. Noah remained silent, just observing. He knew that moment was decisive. "I'll take this to the police station, but first I need to tell my mother everything," he said, breaking the silence. Evelyn nodded with a restrained gesture. "If she listens to the evidence, she won't be able to stay deceived. Just be careful. He won't accept it easily." Noah stood up and held the strap of his backpack firmly. "I didn't come this far to back down now. It's time to open her eyes. Back at the house, Noah waited for Martha to finish watering the plants in the garden. They were alone, and Leonard had gone out to resolve urgent matters, as he always said. When she came in, he calmly called her to the living room. Martha sat on the sofa with a slight smile, as if that day was like any other. Noah sat across from her, took his phone and papers, and without beating around the bush, began to speak. "Mom, I need you to listen to something. Please, just listen." She looked confused but didn't refuse. Upon hearing the recording of Leonard rummaging through his backpack, her expression tightened. When his voice appeared suggesting document manipulation, she covered her mouth with her hands. This can't be true. Leonard would never do something like this. He didn't interrupt. He handed over the copies, the evidence of the forged adoption, Evelyn's old statements. Martha flipped through everything with trembling hands, her eyes scanning each line with growing astonishment. Finally, she dropped the papers in her lap and remained motionless for a long minute. The silence was broken with an almost voiceless whisper. He told me you had died, that everything had been resolved by the doctors." Noah held her hand firmly. "He lied. He made you believe I no longer existed. And all this was to erase my name and keep what wasn't his." Martha, with eyes full of tears, just shook her head in denial. "No, it can't be. Not Leonard." The front door opened, and Leonard entered with his usual firm steps. He carried envelopes and feigned surprise at seeing the two looking so serious. "Is everything okay here?" he asked in a careful tone. Martha stood up with difficulty, still holding the papers. "Leonard, what is this? This says that you lied about everything." He approached slowly, raising his hands as if trying to calm her. "Martha, please, this is a misunderstanding. I never wanted to hurt you. You were destroyed at that time. I just wanted to protect you." Noah said nothing. He just observed every gesture, every rehearsed pause. "You didn't protect me, Leonard. You stole my right to be a mother," Martha said with a choked voice. Leonard tried to approach her, but she backed away. The sadness on his face was carefully calculated. "I saved you from pain, Martha. You were collapsing. I did what I thought was best. I created a life for us. You only survived because I held everything together." She closed her eyes tightly and took a deep breath. "And now? How do you explain this? The recordings, the documents, you went through my son's things." Leonard shook his head, pretending to be offended. "This is all a misunderstanding. This boy, he's confused. Someone put these ideas in his head." Noah stood up, facing the man firmly. "Nobody confused me. I just listened to what you really are." Without another word, Martha went upstairs to the bedroom and locked the door. From inside, contained sobs could be heard, and the house plunged into a thick silence. Leonard ran his hands over his face and threw himself on the sofa, muttering quietly. Noah didn't approach. He knew this was just the beginning. He went up to the hallway, stopped in front of his mother's bedroom door, and spoke with a firm voice. "I'm going to the police. I have everything I need, or almost everything." She didn't answer, but he knew she was listening. "I don't want you to suffer anymore because of someone who never respected you. I'm going to finish what he started." And then he went down with determined steps. In Leonard's office, Noah knew there was a safe. Leonard always kept it locked, but the boy had observed the combination days before hidden behind the bookshelf. Now it was the only piece missing to complete everything. He entered the room silently, moved the rug aside and moved the furniture with effort. The wall revealed the built-in safe. He typed the numbers he had memorized and heard the click of the lock releasing. He opened it cautiously. Inside, there were envelopes, a black folder, and a laminated document. He pulled everything out with quick hands, leaving nothing out of place. His name was there next to Martha's forged signature. This is it, now it's over. He himself kept what will bring everything down. And with that, Noah left, determined to close that chapter. The kitchen clock marked mid-morning when Leonard announced he would go out to deal with personal matters. He wore the same grey coat he used for formal meetings, his face controlled as always, and his unhurried voice as he said goodbye to Martha, who remained cold, not raising her eyes from the embroidery in her hands. Noah observed the scene from the hallway, his heart beating fast. When Leonard crossed the door and the car disappeared down the street, he ran to the room, took his cell phone, and typed a short message to Evelyn. He left. It's now. He put the device in his pocket and took a deep breath. The last piece is still in that wall, and today I'm tearing it out for good. Less than an hour later, Evelyn arrived through the back of the house as they had arranged. She wore a dark blouse and tied her hair back, trying to stay calm. Noah led her carefully to the office, avoiding any noise that might attract attention. The house was silent, but the tension in the air seemed solid. When they pushed the furniture in front of the safe, she stopped and stared at him. "Are you sure it's here?" He nodded and showed her the small metal lock. "I've seen him opening it, but now it's locked again. I need your help with this." Evelyn took a small metal hook from her pocket and knelt down. "If I lose my job and my life for this, at least it will be for justice." The sound of the mechanism giving way was almost imperceptible, but to the two of them it sounded like a thunderclap. Noah opened the safe door carefully and removed the black folder with steady hands. Inside were covered documents, contracts, and a signed adoption authorization form. When he read it, he felt his stomach turn. Martha's signature was there, but he knew it was fake. The name of the orphanage, the date, the declaration that the mother had abandoned her child. Evelyn took the paper and analyzed it carefully. This is the original. The stamp is still fresh, but that signature, she never wrote like that. Noah pulled the envelope and looked at her. "This is what we're going to end everything with. Now he can't deny it anymore." Cursed with the document in hand, they left the house and went directly to the office of a lawyer known to Evelyn, someone who had dealt with irregular adoptions in the past. The man received them in a closed room, analyzed the papers for long minutes, and then took a deep breath, leaving them on the table. "This is serious, very serious. This signature is clearly forged, and the content of this record contradicts the legal norms of the time." Noah clenched his fists, trying to contain his anxiety. "So we can file the lawsuit?" The lawyer nodded. "Yes, and I'll forward this directly to the responsible police station. This type of forgery can result in many years in prison." Evelyn exchanged a glance with Noah and spoke in a low tone. "He won't escape this." "Not now." While the copies were being officialized, Noah sent a new message to Martha, informing her that he was out and that she needed to stay at home. He didn't explain why, but asked her not to open the door to anyone. Evelyn left through the side of the building with the sealed envelope. On the way back, they crossed paths with an unmarked police car. The lawyer had already made contact with the police, who were now setting up surveillance. "He'll try to run," Noah said as he got into the car. "That's what he always does when he feels cornered." Evelyn looked out the window, thoughtful. "Then it's good they're prepared, because this time his exit door is locked." Hours later, upon returning home, Leonard sensed that something had changed in the air. Martha's posture was distant, her gaze harder. When he tried to talk to her, she just said she needed to rest and went up to the bedroom. He walked to the office and noticed that the furniture in front of the safe was slightly out of place. He frowned, approached, and checked the lock. His fingers slid over the lock and felt the slight scratch left by the forced opening. The safe was empty. "No, it can't be now," he muttered, backing away with trembling hands. He ran to Noah's room, but the young man wasn't there. He took what was in there, and now he's going to try to bring me down." Leonard ran to the car, started the engine, and left without explanation. The police, who were already on alert, followed discreetly. He went through 2 streets, tried to evade by turning into familiar alleys, but in less than 15 minutes, a patrol car blocked the path ahead and another blocked the rear. Leonard got out of the vehicle with his arms raised, his voice controlled. "What is this? What absurdity is this?" One of the agents approached firmly. "You are being detained on suspicion of document forgery, child abduction, and document fraud. Everything you say will be used in the investigation." Leonard tried to argue, but was taken away in handcuffs. "This was set up. I was protecting that woman. Everything I did was for her," he said, while neighbors watched the scene in silence. At the same time, another complaint was confirmed. The orphanage director was surprised by investigators with a subpoena. The evidence collected by Evelyn was delivered to the same team, and the complaint of cover-up and omission was made official. The woman tried to maintain her composure, but her expression crumbled when she saw the documents on the table. The denied visits, the altered records, and the orders of silence to employees made up the material. "These documents are internal. Someone invaded my files," she stated. But it didn't help. The agents were clear. "You will be formally heard." And from now on, she is removed from her position. Evelyn, even from outside, watched from a distance. Her time is also over. Every lie has its right time to crumble. Back at the house, Noah entered with the envelope in his hands and found Martha in the kitchen, sitting with her hands crossed on her lap. He approached and placed the document on the table. She looked at it for a few seconds, read it silently, and then raised her eyes. "Did they arrest him?" Noah nodded with a single gesture. "It happened just now. The police have taken him away, and the woman from the orphanage will also be investigated." Martha remained silent, but her eyes filled with tears. All this time. He used my pain for his own benefit." Noah held her hand firmly. "But now it's over. The truth is here, and no one will erase anything anymore." The mother lowered her head and murmured with pain, "If he had told the truth from the beginning, if only he had let me love you." Noah looked at the ceiling, breathing deeply, feeling the weight of each revelation. As much as justice was on its way, what truly mattered was in that silent touch between mother and son. In that time reclaimed, without haste. Now we can truly begin, Mother. Without lies, without masks. Martha wiped her eyes and showed a fragile smile. "You came back to me, and that's all that matters." In that moment, the sound of the house seemed different. As if finally, the silence made room to begin again. Hours passed, the media became interested in covering the case, and soon arrived at Martha's house, who agreed with the idea. The camera lights turned on as soon as Martha adjusted her hands on her lap and looked softly at the reporter sitting across from her. The interview took place in the recently organized living room of the house, still with marks from the renovation that had finished days before. The reporter spoke with controlled emotion, while technicians adjusted the microphone on Martha's light dress. The lady took a deep breath before starting to speak. "I waited for this moment for 18 years. And even with all the pain, I never stopped believing that my son was alive." Her voice trembled, but remained firm. "A mother's heart feels, and mine never accepted absence as the end." Outside the house, some neighbors observed from a distance, respecting the space, but eager to see the face of the woman who had touched so many with her story. Inside, Noah watched everything through the half-open door, with his eyes fixed on his mother, feeling each word like a gentle punch to the chest. He wasn't used to seeing all of this taking public form, but understood it was necessary. After so many years invisible, now his story had a name, had a face. She speaks as if carrying the world, and yet she doesn't let it fall. He arranged the papers in his backpack and thought aloud. Today she gives voice for both of us. The interview aired the following night, and the next day the house received letters, flowers, invitations, and even donations from people who were moved by the case. A group of volunteer lawyers made contact to expedite the legal process, and within a few days, Noah was officially recognized as Martha's legitimate son. The document, signed and stamped, arrived in a white envelope, delivered by the hands of the court assistant herself. Noah opened it calmly, read each line, and held the paper against his chest. Martha approached, hugged her son tightly, and whispered in his ear, "Now no one can erase you from me." Meanwhile, Evelyn followed everything from a distance, still removed from the orphanage, but at peace for having done what was right. An informal meeting was organized by former students she had helped during the years she worked there. The gathering took place in a small community library where dozens of young people came together to hug her and thank her. Evelyn entered shyly, but was received with applause and sincere words. A young man, emotional, said with a trembling voice, "You didn't just take care of us. You saw us when no one else did." She smiled with teary eyes and responded gently, "It was the least I could do, and I would do it all again." The former director, now detained, awaited trial without access to old documents or position of influence. The accusations of omission, negligence, and cover-up were accepted, and the investigation continued firmly. Evelyn received legal protection as a whistleblower, which guaranteed her safety, and all the files delivered by her were considered valid evidence. Noah closely followed each advance in the process. The silence they imposed for so long now screams in the records. He spent nights organizing folders with dates, names, and statements. They thought all this would remain hidden, but every lie became paper, and every paper now weighs. This, with the support of neighbors, Martha's old friends and new contacts that emerged after the case's exposure, the house underwent a complete renovation. Walls were painted, furniture replaced, and even the front garden got new flowers. Martha seemed lighter, smiled more often, and for the first time in many years didn't walk with her head down. Noah helped with every detail, painting fences, changing light bulbs, and renovating the basement where everything had begun again. "This place was where I hid, but now it will be where we live," he said while arranging the shelves. "There are no more secrets here, just a fresh start." The new routine brought calmness to both of them. Evenings were filled with long conversations, old movies and improvised recipes in the kitchen. Martha told stories of his childhood, even when interrupted by painful memories. Noah listened, laughed, asked questions. For the first time, there was time. There was space. "It feels like my life began twice," he said one night, looking out the window. "And now for the first time I can choose what to do with it." Martha came closer and rested her head on his shoulder. "You can do whatever you want, my son, and I'll be here to applaud you." With his documents regularized and calmer days, Noah returned to his studies. He enrolled in an intensive training course for social educators and began attending lectures about youth in vulnerable situations. He felt he could transform his own pain into guidance for others. In one of his first classes, he shared his story with his colleagues, leaving everyone silent. The professor, touched, put his hand on Noah's shoulder and said, "You're not just an example of resilience. You're a voice that no one will silence again." Noah smiled and responded firmly, "I'll use everything I've lived through to ensure no young person stays in the dark like I did." That same week, Evelyn was invited by a foundation to participate in a restructuring project for temporary homes. She initially hesitated, but decided to accept after talking with Noah. The two met in front of the house, and she shared the news with a sparkle in her eyes. "I want to transform these spaces. I can't change what I lived through, but I can prevent others from going through the same." Noah hugged her tightly, feeling that they had both emerged from the same hole and could now walk on solid ground. "You planted in silence. Now you harvest aloud." At the end of that day, Noah sat in the backyard with bare feet on the grass and his gaze lost in the sky. Martha appeared with 2 cups of tea and sat beside him. They remained silent for a few minutes, just watching the leaves swaying in the wind. When he spoke, it was with the calmness of someone who finally had solid ground beneath them. "It's strange to think that all this began with a note left at the door." Martha laughed softly and responded tenderly. "It was more than a note. It was a cry of hope. And thanks to it, my son returned." Noah looked at her and concluded in a low voice, "And this time, it's forever." It was time for the trial. The courtroom was silent, with the air heavy with contained expectations. Martha squeezed Noah's hand firmly, her eyes fixed on the judge who was leafing through the documents before her. In the dock, Leonard kept his face tilted, as if he were hearing without listening, his shoulders curved for the first time since he had been detained. The charges were read one by one: document forgery, abandonment of an incapable person, and property fraud. The evidence, irrefutable, had been presented clearly, and the witnesses were heard without stumbling. In the end, the sentence was pronounced without hesitation. Convicted. Martha closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, a tear rolled down slowly. He lied for so many years, and now, at last, it's over. On the opposite side of the courtroom, the former orphanage director awaited her sentence. Her serious face and raised chin did not hide the evident discomfort. Evelyn watched from a distance, with a tense body and hands interlaced on her lap. When the sentence was read, also without mercy, murmurs began among those present. Institutional negligence, failure to report, and destruction of documents. Convicted. Evelyn released the air she had been holding and closed her eyes for a moment. Now the truth is official. She can no longer hide what she did. Noah leaned over beside her and murmured with conviction, "You won, without having to lie, without having to hide." On the same day, after the conclusion of the trial, Evelyn received an unexpected invitation from the authorities following the case. With the director removed and the orphanage under intervention, someone needed to take provisional leadership. Her name was suggested unanimously among the former students who were heard. She hesitated for brief seconds, but soon accepted. "If I'm going back, it will be to change everything." Noah, who accompanied her, smiled immediately. "You were always in that place, only now you'll enter through the front door." Evelyn shook her head with a slight smile, and for the first time in a long time, she felt she was returning to her true place. The following days were intense. Evelyn took charge of the building with watchful eyes, but a firm heart. The old rules, rigid and impersonal, were torn up one by one. The cafeteria now had soft music during meals. Children could choose the colors of their sheets. Meetings were now held with questions rather than orders. Noah helped her with the renovations, and together they began to redesign the physical and emotional space of the place. "This room was where we were punished just for speaking," he said, pushing a bookshelf. "Now it will be the reading room, where voices will no longer be silenced." Meanwhile, Martha became a constant presence at the orphanage. Every afternoon she arrived with homemade cakes, board games, and an expression that mixed sweetness and authority. She would sit on the floor with the little ones, tell stories from her childhood, and talk about feelings with a delicacy that moved even the most closed-off children. The children called her Aunt Martha, and she smiled like someone rediscovering a lost role. "I never got to see my son grow up, but I can be here, watching other childhoods flourish." One afternoon, as she was leaving the orphanage, she looked at Noah and said with a choked voice, "This place gave you back to me. Now I want to help give others back too." Noah, in parallel, began to accept invitations to speak at events about adoption, justice, and overcoming adversity. His talks became known for their direct and sincere tone, far from rehearsed speeches. He told his story without embellishment, spoke of loneliness, absence, anger, and reconstruction. In auditoriums, young people listened attentively. Some cried, others stood up to hug him at the end. "The pain I experienced cannot be erased, but it can be transformed," he would say as he concluded his speeches. "And if I can make someone feel less lost, then it was all worth it." Evelyn watched him from afar and thought, he not only found his way, he became a light for others. With their adjusted routine, the relationship between mother and son strengthened without rushing. Noah and Martha had lunch together almost every day, walked around the neighborhood, watched old movies, and laughed at simple things. Sometimes they just sat in silence, but it was a silence full of understanding. They didn't need to explain everything. They were there for each other. One night, while washing dishes together, Martha said lightly, "You still have so much to live for, but now you'll live knowing you have somewhere to return to." Noah dried his hands and hugged her from behind. "And I'll never again live far from where I belong." In the administrative part of the orphanage, Evelyn made important structural changes. She created a new regulation based on listening and participation. She implemented weekly conversation circles, art workshops, moments of relaxation, and self-esteem studies. Old staff who previously worked with rigidity were relocated or replaced. She knew that changing the discourse wasn't enough. It was necessary to re-educate the foundation. In one of the first meetings with the team, she firmly declared, "This is not a deposit. This is a temporary home, and every child who passes through these doors will leave believing they deserve love." At the end of that month, a small ceremony was organized to celebrate the transformations. Present were former students, local authorities, volunteers, and children from the orphanage. Evelyn gave a brief emotional speech and thanked everyone for their support. Noah spoke next, mentioning names, moments, and promises of continuity. Martha closed the evening with a direct thank you. "Pain silenced me for a long time, but today I speak on behalf of mothers who wait, and also on behalf of children who return." The audience applauded standing, and among the teary eyes the certainty was established. The mansion gleamed under the afternoon sun, its white and imposing walls reflecting the wealth that John had built over the years. In the meticulously maintained garden, Mary walked among the flowers, her delicate fingers touching the colorful petals, while her light dress swayed with the breeze. She had black hair that fell in soft waves to her waist, brown skin, and deep brown eyes that shined when she smiled. John watched her from the veranda, a tall man with elegant posture, well-trimmed hair and striking features that betrayed his iron determination in business. His real estate empire had grown exponentially over the last 5 years, making him one of the most respected and feared businessmen in the market. "I'm thinking about transforming the guest room into a nursery," said Mary, turning to her husband with a hopeful smile. "Paint it yellow, perhaps. A neutral color that would work for a boy or girl." John smiled, approaching to embrace her from behind, his hands instinctively resting on his wife's still flat stomach. Their 10 years of marriage had been prosperous in all aspects except one. They had not yet managed to realize their dream of starting a family. Not for lack of trying or resources. They had consulted the best specialists, followed all recommended treatments, and prayed incessantly. John, in particular, had become almost obsessive about the subject, seeing a child not only as the fulfillment of a personal dream, but as the guarantee of the continuity of his business legacy. "Yellow is perfect, and we could put a noble wood crib in the center, with a musical mobile spinning above it," replied John, his eyes fixed on the horizon, as if he could visualize the future he so desired. "My father always said that a man is only complete when he has a son to follow in his footsteps." Mary sighed, turning to face him. She shared the desire to be a mother, but sometimes wondered if her husband was really interested in a child or just an heir. These thoughts troubled her, but she quickly pushed them away, preferring to believe in the purity of her husband's desire. She intertwined her fingers with his and gently pulled him toward the house where the staff prepared dinner. The aroma of spices filled the air as they entered the luxuriously decorated dining room, with its shiny mahogany table and chairs upholstered in scarlet velvet. "I spoke with the doctor today," "He said we're doing everything right and that we should keep trying," Mary commented, serving herself a glass of water. "He also said we should relax more, that anxiety can interfere." John frowned, a gesture he made when displeased. His competitive nature made him impatient with failures, even those completely beyond his control. In the business world, he was accustomed to overcoming obstacles with hard work, strategic intelligence, and when necessary, a calculated ruthlessness that had transformed him into a respected corporate predator. But conceiving a child defied all these tactics, placing him in a position of powerlessness that deeply irritated him. He sat at the table and began cutting the meat on his plate with precise, tense movements. "Relax, as if that would solve anything," he muttered, without raising his eyes. "Perhaps we should consider other methods, like that experimental treatment I mentioned." The following days passed in a familiar routine of work, social commitments, and those increasingly mechanical attempts to conceive a child. When their wedding anniversary approached, John surprised Mary with news of a trip to an exclusive beach, accommodation at a luxury hotel, and an entire week away from the pressures of everyday life. Her face lit up with the news, hopeful that time together in a relaxing environment might strengthen not only the chance of pregnancy, but also the emotional bonds that seemed to be wearing thin under the weight of reproductive frustration. "It will be wonderful, John, just the two of us, the sea, the sun. We can reconnect. Remember why we fell in love," said Mary, her eyes sparkling as she mentally planned which clothes to take. "Who knows, maybe we'll come back with a special surprise." The hotel was everything they had promised, and then some: spacious suites overlooking the ocean, impeccable service, restaurants with award-winning chefs, and carefully planned activities for couples. In the first few days, Mary noticed how John seemed more relaxed, his smile more frequent, his hands gentler when he touched her. They swam in the crystalline waters, walked on the white sand, and made love with a renewed passion that seemed to promise the miracle they had been waiting for. But on the morning of the 4th day, while having breakfast on the suite's terrace, Mary felt a sudden dizziness, followed by an intense chill that made her shiver despite the tropical heat. "John, I'm not feeling well," she murmured, trying to stand up, only to feel the world spinning around her. "I think I'm going to—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The last sound she heard was John's alarmed shout as her vision darkened and her body fell unconscious onto the marble floor. When she awoke, she was in a hospital room, fluorescent lights blinding her eyes and the constant beep of cardiac monitors filling the silence. John was by her side, his face pale and tense, his restless hands fidgeting with his cell phone as he did when he was nervous or impatient. "What happened? Why am I here?" asked Mary, her voice hoarse and weak, her dry throat begging for water. Can we go back to the hotel now?" The look John gave her had something different about it. It wasn't just concern. There was a trace of something she couldn't identify. Fear? Anger? Before he could answer, the door opened and a doctor entered, carrying a clipboard and wearing a carefully neutral expression that Mary immediately recognized as the face health professionals use when they have difficult news to deliver. The doctor pulled up a chair, sat down beside the bed and began speaking in a calm voice, explaining that they had done tests while she was unconscious, including a comprehensive tomography to understand the cause of her fainting. "Ma'am, we found something that concerns us. The tests show the presence of a tumor," said the doctor, maintaining eye contact with Mary while waiting for the information to be processed. "We need to do more tests, but preliminary evidence suggests we're dealing with cancer." Mary's world seemed to be crumbling beneath her feet. The words tumor and cancer echoed in her mind as she tried to comprehend what this meant for her life, her dreams, her future with John. Silent tears began to roll down her face as she squeezed her husband's hand, seeking strength and comfort. Beside her, John had grown even paler, his eyes fixed on the doctor, as if expecting him to reveal that it was all a terrible mistake, a misunderstanding that would be corrected at any moment. "What are the chances of cure?" asked John, his voice strangely controlled, almost cold. "And how long does the treatment take? How will this affect other health issues?" The doctor patiently explained about available treatments, surgery, chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and their possible combinations depending on the results of more detailed examinations. He talked about recovery chances, survival statistics, and expected side effects. And then, answering the unformulated question but clearly present in John's mind, the doctor addressed the issue of fertility. "Unfortunately, the treatment we will need to implement will have a significant impact on reproductive capacity," he explained gently, addressing Mary primarily. "Chemotherapy and radiation can cause damage to eggs and the reproductive system as a whole. There is a possibility, albeit small, of preserving eggs before starting treatment. But given the stage at which we found the tumor, I strongly recommend we begin treatment as soon as possible." The journey back home was silent and tense, with John driving in silence while Mary watched the landscape pass by the car window, feeling strangely disconnected from everything around her. The news of cancer was devastating on its own, but added to the likely loss of the ability to have children, it seemed like a double sentence of unhappiness. When they finally arrived at the mansion, Mary hoped to find comfort in the familiarity of her home and the support of her husband. But John was distant, spending most of his time in his office talking on the phone or working on the computer. "I need to get organized for the coming months," was his brief explanation when Mary asked why he was so absent. "Business can't stop, especially now that we'll have considerable medical expenses." The following weeks were a blur of medical appointments, painful examinations, and difficult decisions about the treatment plan. Mary tried to stay optimistic, clinging to the hope of surviving and, perhaps somehow, still fulfilling her dream of becoming a mother in the future. John, on the other hand, became emotionally more absent each day. When he was physically present, he was irritable, impatient, as if Mary's illness were a personal inconvenience rather than a shared tragedy. Conversations about the nursery completely ceased, replaced by discussions about health insurance, hospital costs, and reorganizing schedules to accommodate treatment sessions. "I'm scared, John," Mary confessed one night, after a particularly difficult chemotherapy session that had left her exhausted and nauseated. "Not just about the disease, but about what's happening to us. I feel like you're growing more and more distant." The man who stared back at her seemed almost like a stranger. His eyes were cold, distant, as if he were looking at a complicated business problem instead of his sick wife. John rose from the armchair where he was sitting, placed his whiskey glass on the coffee table with an abrupt movement, and walked to the window, where he remained looking at the garden they had once walked through together, making plans for a future that now seemed impossible. "What do you expect from me, Mary? That I pretend nothing has changed? That our plans haven't been completely destroyed?" He replied, his voice laden with a cold, calculated anger. "I invested 10 years in this marriage with the expectation of starting a family, of having an heir for everything I've built." Mary felt as if she had been slapped. It was as if all her suspicions about John's true motivations for wanting a child were being confirmed in the worst possible way. It wasn't about love or about the desire to create a life together. It was about legacy, about preserving and passing on wealth and power. Hot tears streamed down her face as she struggled to find words to confront the man who was now revealing his true nature in her moment of greatest vulnerability. So that's it? 10 years of marriage reduced to an investment that didn't provide the expected return? She asked, her voice trembling with emotion. I thought our love was stronger than that we could face anything together. John turned around, his face a mask of calculated coldness. Years of ruthless negotiations and tough business decisions had hardened something inside him, making him capable of cutting ties without hesitation when a relationship no longer served his purposes. And now, looking at Mary, pale, thinner, with her hair beginning to fall out due to chemotherapy, he saw not the woman he had fallen in love with, but a reminder of failure, of lost dreams and frustrated expectations. I won't take care of a sick woman who can't give me children. Get out of this house, he exclaimed, the words coming out like poison. I don't have time to waste on someone who will only bring me expenses and sadness. The silence that followed was deafening. Mary felt as if the air had been ripped from her lungs, as if the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. She had imagined several difficult scenarios since the diagnosis: pain, hair loss, the possibility of not surviving. But never, not even in her darkest moments, had she considered that John would abandon her in her time of greatest need. She slowly rose from the bed where she was reclining, her weak legs threatening to give way under the weight of her body and the betrayal she had just suffered. You can't be serious, she murmured, her voice almost inaudible. We promised to stay together in sickness and in health, remember? John merely looked at his watch, as if counting the minutes until she was out of his life. His expression was devoid of any compassion or remorse, replaced by the cold efficiency of an executive terminating an unfavorable contract. He walked to the closet, grabbed a small suitcase and threw it on the bed next to Mary, in a clear gesture of finality. You have 1 hour to get your things and leave. I'll leave a check to cover your medical expenses for the next few months, he said, pragmatic to the end. After that, you're on your own. With trembling hands and a broken heart, Mary began to put some clothes in the suitcase, unable to believe that 10 years of marriage were ending like this, so abruptly and without dignity. She took some photos, personal jewelry that had belonged to her mother, and the medications she needed to take daily. As she closed the suitcase, she realized how little she was taking from an entire decade shared with the man who now watched her as if she were an unwanted stranger in his home. Tears flowed freely down her face, but she refused to beg or plead. There was something liberating about finally seeing John's true character, even if the revelation came with so much pain. One day you'll regret this, John, she said, stopping at the bedroom door. Not for what you're losing materially, but for what this reveals about who you really are. Mary left the mansion under the light rain that was beginning to fall, as if the sky itself were crying for her. On the sidewalk, she looked one last time at the house where she had been happy, or at least believed she was. Now, with the small suitcase in one hand and the other arm protecting the womb where she would never carry John's child, she walked away, her steps uncertain but determined to find a new path amid the storm. Behind her, John slammed the door shut, the sound echoing like a period at the end of a chapter in her life that was ending in the cruelest way possible, abandoned by the man who had promised to love her forever, precisely when she needed him most. Years had passed since that rainy night. Mary's small apartment, located on the 3rd floor of a modest building, received the golden light of dusk through the only window in the living room. The space was cramped but cozy, walls painted in a soft shade of green, a few pieces of furniture chosen with care, and potted plants strategically placed to bring life to the environment. It was almost impossible to believe that this same woman, now sitting on the worn sofa, while tucking a short strand of hair behind her ear, had once lived in a luxurious mansion. Her face was thinner, with some lines of expression that didn't exist before, but her eyes, those same deep brown eyes, now shone with a determination she had never possessed in times of material wealth. Cancer had been a relentless adversary, but not as cruel as John's abandonment. It's almost time to leave for the group, Mary said to herself, getting up with a small groan. The side effects of the treatment still made themselves felt in her bones. They need to hear that there is life beyond illness, beyond abandonment. The community center was a 15-minute walk away in a simple red brick building. Mary adjusted the colorful scarf that partially covered her head. Her hair was beginning to grow back, but not enough to dispense with the accessory, and took a deep breath before entering the room where the support group met weekly. The chairs were arranged in a circle, some already occupied by women in different stages of treatment. Some had lost all their hair, others were visibly fragile, with skin that was too yellow or too pale. All, without exception, carried in their eyes that peculiar mixture of fear and hope that Mary knew so well. Over the months, she had become a kind of mentor for newcomers, one who proved it was possible to survive not only cancer, but also the emotional losses that frequently accompanied it. "Mary, we were waiting for you," said one of the youngest women in the group, her anxious eyes fixed on her. "Can you tell us more about how you dealt with abandonment?" "My fiancé left me yesterday, said he can't handle the pressure." Mary sat down, feeling the weight of all those expectations, of all those broken stories that somehow mirrored her own. She closed her eyes for a moment, searching for the right words, those that could offer comfort without denying the brutal reality of rejection. When she finally spoke, her voice was firm, without self-pity. "Cancer revealed who John really was, just as it's revealing who the people around you really are. It's painful, yes, but it's also a filter. It separates those who love unconditionally from those who only love when it's convenient," she explained, looking at each face in the circle. "One day you'll be thankful for not spending your precious energy on those who don't deserve it." It was during one of these meetings, on a particularly difficult afternoon when Mary had received concerning results from her tests, that she first noticed the quiet man sitting in the corner of the room. Unlike the other health professionals who occasionally participated in the group, he didn't wear a white coat or carry clipboards with notes. He wore simple clothes, faded jeans and a blue long-sleeved shirt, and observed everything with attentive and compassionate eyes. His dark hair was cut short, and there was something in his countenance that conveyed an understanding that went beyond the professional, as if he knew pain not just through medical books but through personal experience. At the end of the session, as the women dispersed, he approached Mary with hesitant steps, as if afraid of invading a space that didn't belong to him. "Your testimony today touched something deep within me," he said, his soft and melodious voice contrasting with his large calloused hands of someone accustomed to physical work. "I'm Carl, volunteer nurse. I'll be accompanying the group from today on." Mary extended her hand, surprised by the comforting warmth that emanated from his firm handshake. There was something in Carl's eyes, a dark brown, almost black, that spoke of pain overcome, of battles won at a high cost. It was a look she recognized because she saw something similar every morning in the mirror. "Welcome, Carl. We always need more people who truly understand," she replied, realizing she didn't need to explain what she meant by understand. "It's not just about medical knowledge, it's about knowing what it's like to be on the other side." In the following weeks, Carl became a constant presence at the meetings, offering not only his medical expertise, but mainly his attentive and genuine listening. Mary observed how he knelt beside women in tears, how he held their hands without fear or disgust when treatment had deformed their bodies, how he remembered personal details that many professionals would consider irrelevant. The name of a dog, a favorite hobby before the illness, the ice cream flavor that still didn't cause nausea during chemotherapy. The third week of December brought an unexpected snowstorm, forcing the cancellation of many activities in the city. Only Mary and two other women managed to reach the community center for the group meeting, only to discover that the usual coordinator had also failed to attend. They were about to go back home when Carl appeared, covered in snow, his cheeks red from the cold, carrying a brown paper bag. "I thought maybe some people would make it, so I brought hot chocolate and homemade cookies," he explained, shaking the snow off his coat. "My grandmother always said there's no problem that doesn't improve at least a little bit with chocolate and good conversation." The improvised group gathered around a table, their hands wrapped around steaming mugs while the storm raged outside. With fewer participants, the conversation naturally became more intimate, more personal. It was then that Carl, for the first time, shared fragments of his own story, how he had been abandoned by his parents at 6 years old, left with an already elderly grandmother who barely had the means to support him. How at 9 years old he had been diagnosed with an aggressive type of leukemia, and how his grandmother had washed other people's clothes to pay for medications that insurance didn't cover. And mainly, how this experience had transformed him into who he was today, dedicating his life to alleviating the suffering of others who, like him, faced not only the disease, but also the abyss of loneliness that often accompanied it. "So you understand," Mary murmured, not as a question, but as recognition of a shared truth. "You know both faces of the monster, the disease and the abandonment." Carl nodded, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made Mary look away, suddenly aware of a blush that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room or with the side effects of her medications. "Some people walk through flowery gardens all their lives and never learn to value a single petal," he responded, his words coming out soft but laden with meaning. "Others cross deserts and manage to find beauty in every drop of dew." From that day on, something subtly changed between them. Carl began to appear not only at group meetings, but also at Mary's chemotherapy sessions. He brought books to read aloud while the potent, toxic liquid dripped into her veins, a welcome distraction from the nausea and discomfort. In the weeks when she was too weak to cook, he showed up with homemade soups, his grandmother's recipes that were sworn to have healing properties. Mary tried to refuse, aware of his modest financial situation, but Carl insisted with a smile that lit up his entire face. "Don't confuse charity with compassion," he would say, carefully placing the labeled containers in the small refrigerator of the apartment. "Charity is vertical from top to bottom. Compassion is horizontal from heart to heart." March arrived with its merciless winds and hesitant promises of spring. Mary had just gone through another round of tests, and the results, although not conclusive, showed promising signs. The tumor was responding to treatment, shrinking millimeter by millimeter. A silent battle waged inside her exhausted body. It was a particularly difficult day, with intense pain due to the treatment, when Carl knocked at her door. Unlike other visits, he seemed nervous, almost anxious, carrying a package wrapped in simple paper and tied with string. "It's nothing special," he hastened to explain even before Mary could ask, placing the package in her hands. "Just something I thought might help on difficult days, when I can't be here." Inside the package was a handcrafted notebook with a soft leather cover bearing Mary's initials discreetly engraved in the lower corner. The pages were made of textured paper, some containing small watercolors of wildflowers, others with inspiring quotes written in Carl's elegant handwriting. There was also space to write, to draw, to paste photos, an invitation to document not just the journey of the disease, but also moments of unexpected beauty, of furtive joy, of stubborn hope. Mary felt hot tears running down her cheeks, an emotion she couldn't name tightening her throat. It wasn't just the gift itself, but the time and care invested in something so personalized, so attentive to her specific needs. "How did you know?" she asked, running her fingers over the pages with reverence. "How did you know that I have trouble sleeping, thinking about everything that could go wrong?" Carl smiled, that smile that slowly began at the corners of his mouth and gradually lit up his eyes, completely transforming his face. He sat down beside her on the sofa, carefully maintaining a respectful distance, although his eyes betrayed a desire for greater closeness. "I observe you," he answered simply, without a drop of shame in his voice. "Not as a doctor observes a patient, but as a person sees another person, with everything that she is, not just with what the disease has made of her." Summer brought relief in multiple forms. The doctors were cautiously optimistic about Mary's response to treatment, not a complete remission yet, but enough to reduce the frequency of chemotherapy sessions. Her hair, once long and wavy, now grew in small rebellious curls that framed her face with a new delicacy. The persistent nausea became occasional, allowing her to regain some of the lost weight. And, perhaps more significantly, mornings no longer brought that crushing feeling of despair, that brief moment of terror upon opening her eyes and remembering reality. There was another emotion now mixed with the daily struggles, a cautious anticipation, a desire to see what the day would bring, especially if it included some moments with Carl. "I'm thinking of going back to work, even if part-time," Mary commented as they walked slowly through the park. an activity that had become a weekly ritual whenever the weather allowed. My former colleague from the architecture office said I can do small projects from home. Carl offered his arm to support her when he noticed she was breathing more heavily after the small incline. There was a gentleness in his gestures of help that never made Mary feel invalid or dependent, just cared for, just valued in her momentary vulnerability. "I think it's an excellent idea if you feel ready," he replied, his tone carefully neutral without pressure in either direction. "Just promise you'll respect your limits and not try to prove anything to anyone." It was during one of these walks, when autumn was beginning to paint the trees with shades of red and gold, that Carl finally found the courage to speak about what was growing between them. They had stopped to rest on a wooden bench overlooking the small lake, watching ducks gliding serenely across the water. The silence between them was comfortable, the kind that only exists between people who don't feel the need to fill it with empty words. Mary had her eyes closed, face turned toward the warm late afternoon sun, when she felt Carl's hesitant fingers seeking hers in the space between them on the bench. "I'm afraid I'm confusing things," he began, his voice trembling slightly, revealing a vulnerability he rarely let show, of misinterpreting what exists between us, of crossing a line I shouldn't. Mary opened her eyes, turning to face him. In the golden light of dusk, Carl's face looked different, younger, more exposed, stripped of the professional confidence that typically characterized him. There was something infinitely precious in this vulnerability, in this courage to risk rejection to seek truth. For a moment, Mary felt afraid too, though for different reasons. Afraid of not being able to love again, of being too damaged, of eventually disappointing him, or worse, being abandoned again when she needed it most. But beneath this fear, like an underground current, flowed something stronger, something that had grown silently during months of genuine companionship, mutual respect, shared understanding. "I'm not confusing anything," Mary replied, her voice firmer than she expected. "I am scared, yes, but not confused. What I feel for you is the clearest thing in a life that has become so uncertain." The transformation on Carl's face was almost comical. Relief, joy, and disbelief, mixed in an expression so open, so sincere, that Mary couldn't help a small laugh. He brought her hand to his lips, kissing it with reverence, as if it was something infinitely precious. He didn't try to kiss her on the lips that day, respecting the invisible boundaries she still needed, giving time for trust to grow at the same pace as affection. It was so different from the impetuous passion she had lived with John, one that had burned intensely only to extinguish at the first real adversity. What was growing between her and Carl had deeper roots, nourished by common ground of survival, of understanding human frailties, of valuing the small acts of kindness in a world that often seemed designed to break hearts. "I don't promise to be perfect," said Carl, his eyes fixed on hers with almost painful intensity. "But I promise to never use your vulnerabilities against you, never turn your fears into weapons, never abandon when the path gets difficult." The following months brought a series of firsts. The first hesitant kiss under the doorway of Mary's apartment, Carl's hands gently framing her face, as if it were the most precious thing he had ever touched. The first time he cooked for her in his own apartment, even smaller than hers, but welcoming in its organized simplicity. The first night they spent together, just sleeping embraced, when a winter storm caused a blackout in the neighborhood, and Mary's fear of being alone in the dark overcame her hesitation to take this step. And in each of these firsts, Carl demonstrated the same infinite patience, the same respect for her boundaries, the same silent gratitude for each small barrier she allowed him to cross. There was no rush, no rigid expectations, just two people damaged by life finding in each other safe space to heal old wounds. "Sometimes I think cancer was a disguised gift," Mary commented one night, nestled against Carl's chest as they watched the stars from the small balcony of her apartment. "If it weren't for it, I would still be living a lie with a man who only loved me while I served his purposes." Carl caressed her hair, now long enough to form small curls that framed her face in a way he found absolutely adorable. There was a solemnity in his expression when he answered, as if weighing each word. "Pain is rarely the gift itself, but sometimes it's the path to something we couldn't find otherwise," he reflected, his deep voice mixing with the distant sound of traffic. Like a map written in code, that we can only decipher by passing through the darkest valley. When the doctor finally pronounced the word remission, after another complete cycle of exams, Mary cried in Carl's arms for almost an hour. They weren't just tears of relief, although that feeling was certainly present. They were tears of gratitude for the second chance, not just to live, but to live authentically, valuing what really mattered. They were tears for the time lost seeking validation in the wrong things, the wrong people. And they were, perhaps most significantly, tears of amazement at the unexpected way life had offered her redemption. Through the very disease that had almost killed her, through the abandonment that had almost broken her, she had found her way to a truer love than she had ever known. And now? Carl asked that night, as they celebrated the news with a small party in Mary's living room. Just the two of them, and a bottle of non-alcoholic wine. What's the next chapter in Mary's story? She smiled, that full smile that had disappeared for so long and now returned with increasing frequency. There was a quiet confidence in her movements when she stood up and extended her hand to Carl, inviting him to a slow dance to the soft music coming from the small radio in the corner of the room. Her body was different. Scars where once there was only smooth skin, more prominent bones, a fragility that might never completely disappear. But there was also a new strength, a resilience that went beyond the physical, a beauty that had nothing to do with the superficial standards that had concerned her before. In Carl's arms, moving slowly across the small living room, Mary finally felt she had found her place in the world, not in the grand and luxurious spaces of her previous life, but in this small apartment, with this man who loved her not despite her scars, but with them, through them, because of them. The next chapter, she answered, resting her head on his shoulder, is still being written. But for the first time, I'm not afraid to turn the page. John's mansion seemed to grow a little larger each day, its empty spaces echoing with a silence that no amount of ambient music could fully fill. Years had passed since he had expelled Mary from his life, and although his fortune had doubled during this period, the result of aggressive investments and strategic acquisitions of struggling companies, something indefinable seemed to be missing. The white walls, once elegant, now appeared sterile. The expensive furniture cold, the artwork acquired at exclusive auctions empty of meaning. John walked through the rooms like a ghost in his own castle, watching the sunset through the enormous windows that offered a privileged view of the city. Not even the occasional company of stunning women, models, actresses, socialites, could dispel that persistent feeling that something essential was missing. They all eventually left, disheartened by the coldness that had permanently settled in his heart, by his inability to offer anything beyond expensive gifts and nights at exclusive restaurants. "Sometimes I wonder if it was a mistake," John muttered to his reflection in the mirror while adjusting his Italian silk tie. "But she was dying and I needed someone who could give me a child, not a burden." Breakfast was served on the veranda, as on all mornings when the weather permitted. The immaculately arranged table seemed absurdly large for a solitary man, but John insisted on maintaining certain traditions, certain standards, as if formality could compensate for the absence of genuine human connection. The housekeeper, a middle-aged woman who rarely spoke beyond what was strictly necessary, placed the newspaper and some magazines next to his plate, as she always did. John barely paid attention to the food as he listlessly flipped through the publications, more out of habit than genuine interest. It was then that his eyes fell upon a small note in the social section of a local magazine, accompanied by a photograph that made his heart skip a beat. The title was simple: "Charity event raises funds for oncology treatment center." But it wasn't the title that caught his attention. It was the familiar face in one of the photos illustrating the article. "Mary," he whispered, a mixture of surprise and something akin to nostalgia tightening his chest. There she was, smiling at the camera, her hair much shorter than he remembered, but undeniably her. She looked thinner, with more pronounced features, but there was a luminosity in her face that strongly contrasted with the last image he had of her, pale, fragile, devastated. Beside her stood a man whom John did not immediately recognize. He wasn't anyone from the social circle they had frequented together. This man had a simple appearance, with a genuine smile and an arm protectively placed around her shoulders. John brought the magazine closer to his eyes, reading the caption in small letters: "Architect Mary, cancer survivor, accompanied by her boyfriend Carl, volunteer nurse at the support center where they met. The information caused an inexplicable discomfort in John, a strange sensation that he quickly tried to rationalize as mere curiosity about the fate of someone who had been part of his life. "She always had bad taste," he muttered to himself, tossing the magazine aside with a gesture that was meant to be casual, but carried poorly disguised irritation. She must be with him out of convenience. A nurse? She probably needs someone to take care of her while she remains sick. Try as he might, John couldn't forget the image for the rest of the day. In important meetings, while executives presented reports and projections, his mind repeatedly returned to that smile, that apparent happiness that Mary displayed alongside a man who certainly couldn't offer even a fraction of the material comfort he had provided. There was something deeply disturbing about the idea that she might be well, happy even, without him, especially with someone so obviously inferior in terms of status and resources. During dinner, alone in the immense dining room, John found himself imagining what her life might be like now. Where did she live? Under what conditions? How did she pay for treatment without his money? The idea of Mary living in a small apartment, depending on the charity of a poorly paid nurse, should have brought him a sense of superiority, validation for his decision. Instead, it left a bitter taste in his mouth. "She'll realize the mistake she made," he said aloud, as if trying to convince the silent walls. "When the money runs out and reality sets in, she'll regret not accepting my help when I offered it." The following weeks brought an apparently normal routine. John immersed himself even more deeply in work, as if the growing numbers in his bank accounts could somehow fill the emptiness that seemed to be growing inside him. He acquired another luxury property, bought a limited edition sports car, made donations to carefully selected charities that would ensure honorable mentions and plaques with his name. All these actions seemed increasingly empty, devoid of any real satisfaction. On the rare occasions when he allowed himself to think about it, John told himself it was just a phase, that he would eventually find a suitable woman, young and healthy, with whom he could have the child he always wanted. But even that prospect had lost some of its luster. At night, in his dreams, he often saw Mary's face, not as it was in the recent photo, but as she was in the early years of marriage, full of life and possibilities, looking at him as if he were the most important person in the world. "I can't be stuck in the past," he said firmly to his reflection, as he prepared for yet another social event that didn't really interest him. "She made her choice and I made mine. Life goes on." The coincidence, if one can call it that, occurred on a Friday night, 4 months after John had seen that photo in the magazine. He had scheduled a business dinner at the Star Restaurant, the most exclusive restaurant in the city, known for its months-long waiting list and its strict privacy policy that attracted celebrities and magnates seeking discretion. The place was the very definition of luxury, with soft lighting, elegant furniture, and impeccable service that anticipated wishes before they were even expressed. John arrived early, as was his custom, always preferring to be the first to any appointment, a small habit of control he maintained in all aspects of his life. The maitre d' led him to a privileged table, situated in a corner that offered both privacy and a clear view of the rest of the environment. John ordered an aged whiskey, appreciating the weight of the crystal in his hand while waiting for his guest, a potential investor from another country. "Sir, your guest just called. Unfortunately, he will need to cancel the meeting due to an unforeseen issue with his flight," informed the maitre d', approaching discreetly. "He sends 1,000 apologies and suggested rescheduling for lunch tomorrow." John nodded, hiding his annoyance behind a mask of indifference cultivated over years of negotiations. He considered leaving. The prospect of dining alone wasn't particularly attractive, even in a place like this. But something made him stay, perhaps the reluctance to return to the empty mansion earlier than planned. He ordered the menu and was considering the options when his gaze was drawn to movement at the restaurant entrance. A woman was entering, accompanied by a man. There was something familiar about her, in the way she moved, in the tilt of her head when she smiled. John felt his heart accelerate before his brain fully processed the information. It was Mary, no doubt about it. Even with the distance, even with the change in her appearance, he would recognize her anywhere. "It's not possible," he muttered, his body tensing involuntarily. Of all places, Right here, right today. John observed with a mixture of fascination and discomfort as the couple was led to a table on the other side of the restaurant. The man beside her was the same from the photo, the nurse, dressed in what appeared to be his best suit. Well cut, but clearly not designer. Still, there was dignity in his posture, a quiet confidence in the way he pulled out the chair for Mary before sitting down. And then, when she turned slightly to thank the waiter who handed them the menus, John saw what his brain initially refused to process. Mary's elegant but simple dress outlined an unmistakable curve in her belly. She was pregnant. Undeniably pregnant. Not in the early stages, but with a prominent belly, probably in the advanced second trimester. The shock was so great that John almost dropped his glass, the amber liquid dangerously oscillating near the edge. Impossible, he whispered to himself, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes clearly saw. The doctors said she couldn't. The scene before him seemed surreal, as if he were observing an alternative reality where his worst insecurities took shape. Mary had not only survived, she was radiant. The cancer that should have consumed her seemed to have left no visible marks beyond a maturity in her features that only made her more beautiful. Her hair, though shorter than it used to be, now framed her face in healthy curls. Her skin had that characteristic pregnancy glow, and there was a serenity in her expression that John couldn't remember seeing before. But most disturbing of all was the way she looked at the man in front of her, with a mixture of admiration, complicity, and love that made John's stomach painfully contract. It was a look he knew well, as she used to direct it at him in the early years of their marriage, before the obsession for an heir began to erode their relationship. How did he achieve what I, with all my resources, could not? Thought John, a bitter taste of bile rising in his throat. What does this man have that I don't? John observed, paralyzed, as the couple chatted animatedly, their hands occasionally meeting over the table in gestures of casual affection. At one point, he saw Mary taking the man's hand to her belly, as if sharing some movement of the baby. The smile that illuminated the nurse's face at that moment was so genuine, so full of wonder and gratitude, that John had to look away, feeling strangely like an intruder witnessing something sacred. Memories flooded his mind, he and Mary discussing fertility treatments, consultations with specialists, the growing frustration with each failed attempt, the way he gradually began to blame her, as if her inability to get pregnant was a personal failure, a breach of contract in their matrimonial transaction. And now there she was carrying a child, not his but of a man who probably didn't have even a fraction of his wealth. "Sir, is everything all right?" asked the waiter, approaching discreetly upon noticing the paleness in his face. "Can I bring you anything else?" The sound called John's attention back to reality. He realized he had been holding his breath, that his hands were slightly trembling, that a cold sweat was beginning to form on his forehead. He needed to leave before being seen. The idea of a confrontation, of having to look into Mary's eyes after everything he had done, was unbearable, but his legs seemed made of lead, refusing to obey. Something primitive inside him, a toxic combination of wounded pride, envy, and a disturbing feeling he refused to recognize as regret, kept him fixed to the chair, unable to take his eyes off the scene that represented everything he had lost. "I'm fine," he finally responded, his voice sounding strange even to his own ears. "Bring the check, please. I need to go." While waiting, John continued observing the couple. Each shared laugh, each exchanged glance like a small stab to his ego. It was then that he saw Mary raise her eyes, her gaze sweeping the restaurant in a casual movement until it stopped abruptly. Their eyes met across the space filled with tables, people, and years of separation. For an instant that seemed to freeze time, John saw a series of emotions cross her face. Surprise, recognition, perhaps a brief flash of something like sadness or nostalgia. But there was no anger, no resentment, none of the bitterness he would expect from someone who had been abandoned in their most vulnerable moments. Instead, after the initial shock, what remained in her expression was something much harder to bear, a kind of understanding pity, as if she could see through him to the emptiness his existence had become. "Mary," he murmured, the name escaping his lips like an involuntary prayer. John couldn't tell how long that eye contact lasted, seconds perhaps, though it seemed much longer. It was interrupted when the nurse, noticing the change in Mary's expression, followed her gaze. There was a moment of confusion on his face, followed by a flash of recognition when Mary probably whispered an explanation. The man showed no hostility or aggression, as John would have expected. Instead, after a moment of hesitation, he did something completely unexpected. He briefly nodded to John, an almost respectful gesture, before turning his attention back to Mary, placing a protective but not possessive hand over hers. It was as if he recognized the role John had played in her life without allowing it to diminish in any way the present they shared. "Sir, your check," said the waiter, interrupting the moment with professional discretion. John signed the receipt mechanically, leaving an absurdly generous tip, an automatic gesture that required no conscious thought. He stood up like a man in a trance, his legs now suddenly eager to take him away from there, out of that space that seemed to have drastically shrunk. As he walked toward the exit, he made a conscious effort not to look in Mary's direction again, although he could feel her eyes following him. The cool night air hit his face like a slap, bringing painful clarity. His driver, waiting on the sidewalk, hurried to open the car door, but John gestured dismissively. "I'll walk for a bit," he said, his voice rough. "Go back to the mansion. I'll call when I need you." The streets of the elegant neighborhood were partially empty at that hour, allowing John to walk without the constant irritation of bumping into other people. The night was pleasant, with a gentle breeze carrying the distant scent of jasmine from a nearby garden. On any other occasion, he would have appreciated the exclusive environment, proud to be part of the select group that could afford to frequent that area of the city. Now, however, he barely noticed the luxury establishments, the elegant facades, the imported cars parked along the sidewalk. His mind was filled with images that cruelly overlapped. Mary in her wedding dress on their wedding day. Mary pale and frightened, receiving her cancer diagnosis. Mary leaving his house with just a small suitcase, abandoned when she needed support the most. And finally, Mary pregnant, radiant, looking at another man as if he were her entire world. "How is this possible?" he asked aloud, startling an elegant woman passing in the opposite direction. The doctors guaranteed she could never get pregnant after the treatment. The answer came in a voice that seemed strangely similar to his father's, a hard man who had built an empire from nothing and who frequently despised what he called his son's useless sentimentalism. "Maybe the problem was never her, maybe the problem was always you." John stopped abruptly, the realization hitting him with the force of a physical blow. They had never seriously considered that possibility. All the tests, all the treatments, all the consultations with specialists had started from the assumption that Mary was the problem to be fixed, and he, in his arrogance, never questioned that assumption. It was easier, more comfortable for his ego to believe that the flaw was in her. Or perhaps, the relentless voice in his mind continued, it's something even simpler. Perhaps it's the power of true, unconditional love, the kind of love you were never capable of offering. John laughed bitterly, the sound echoing in the empty streets like the cry of a wounded animal. True love. What sentimental nonsense! The world operated on transactions, on exchanges of value, on investments calculated to maximize returns. That's how he had built his empire. That's how he had approached his marriage. Mary was an asset that, when it stopped offering the expected return, an heir to his fortune was discarded like a failed investment. And now life was showing him with cruel irony that he had made the most basic mistake of any investor. He had incorrectly evaluated the asset, had given up too soon, had lost the opportunity for his greatest return. "I would have given her everything," he murmured into the night, his voice breaking. "Everything money can buy." And perhaps that was exactly the problem, John realized, as he slowly returned to where his driver was waiting, resigned to go back to his empty mansion, to his life of material achievements, empty of meaning. He had offered Mary everything money could buy, but apparently the nurse had offered something that no amount of money ever could. Presence in difficult moments, support without expectations, love that didn't depend on her usefulness or reproductive capacity. And ironically, that emotional investment had resulted in exactly the return that John most coveted: a child, a continuity, a future. As he got into the car, John felt a lump in his throat and an unusual moisture in his eyes that he refused to recognize as tears. "Home, sir? asked the driver, looking at him in the rearview mirror. John nodded silently, unable to trust his voice. As the car glided through the illuminated streets of the city, he observed the people on the sidewalks, couples holding hands, families with children, groups of friends laughing, and felt more distant from them than ever. The mansion that awaited him, with its empty rooms and oppressive silence, wasn't really a home. It was just a physical space filled with expensive objects, as empty of meaning as his own existence had become. "What have I done?" whispered John, the words so low that not even he was sure he had said them aloud. "My God, what have I done?" Spring had arrived in full force, bringing with it an explosion of life that seemed to reflect the moment that Mary and Carl were living. The small apartment was now filled with the occasional crying and soft coos of Michael, their newborn son. The birth occurred without complications, another miracle in a story already full of them. The baby was born with dark hair and the same intense eyes as his mother. Carl had cried when holding him for the first time, a silent cry that made Mary fall even more in love with the man who stayed by her side. "He has your eyes," whispered Carl, caressing his son's little face, "and your strength too. Look how he grips my finger, as if he already knows exactly what he wants in life." Days turned into weeks, establishing a new routine that brought a fullness neither had experienced before. The handcrafted crib that Carl had built occupied a privileged corner of the living room, near the window, where morning light created dancing patterns. Photos of little Michael began to fill the walls, documenting each sleepy smile, each significant moment. "I never thought I could love someone like this so instantly," Mary confessed while rocking the baby. "It's as if he had always been a part of me." That Sunday morning, Mary was cradling Michael, who slept in her arms, when the doorbell rang. Carl, surprised, opened the door and found John in the hallway, impeccably dressed and holding an enormous bouquet of exotic flowers. A tense silence settled, the two men studying each other, recognizing one another without ever having been introduced. "You must be Carl," John finally said. "I need to speak with Mary, please." Carl hesitated, but before he could decide, he heard Mary's voice behind him. "It's okay, let him in," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "I think it's time we close this chapter once and for all." John entered, his eyes observing the surroundings until they settled on Mary with the baby in her arms, an image that made him stop abruptly. He had imagined this moment, but now, confronted with reality, all the prepared words seemed inadequate. "Mary, he began, extending the bouquet. "You look beautiful." Mary accepted the flowers with a nod, handing them to Carl, who placed them in a simple vase. John approached cautiously, his eyes fixed on the small bundle in her arms. "May I?" he asked, indicating the sofa beside her. With a gesture of agreement, he sat down, maintaining a respectful distance. His gaze couldn't move away from the baby, and something in his face seemed to slowly crumble. "Mary, I made the biggest mistake of my life," said John, his voice more sincere than she had ever heard it. "I've been thinking about you every day since I saw you in the restaurant. I can't forget how happy you looked." Mary observed the man who had once been her world, noticing the changes time had imprinted on him. She felt a strange detachment, as if she were observing a scene about someone else's life. "I want you to come back to me," John continued, leaning forward. "Don't marry this man. He's poor and won't be able to take care of you and the child like I can. I can give you both a life he could never offer." Carl, who was watching from the kitchen, visibly tensed, but kept his silent promise to give Mary the space she needed. His eyes briefly met hers, conveying confidence and support. Mary repositioned the baby in her arms, revealing his little face more clearly to John. "John, when I needed you most, you sent me away," she responded with surprising calmness. "You chose not to be part of my pain, so you have no right to want to be part of my joy now." The baby stirred, briefly opening his eyes before falling back asleep, confident in his mother's arms. "Carl welcomed me when I was most vulnerable and saw beauty in me when I couldn't see it myself," she continued, looking at the man in the kitchen. "He held my hand during every chemotherapy session, dried my tears when I was too scared to sleep." John tried to speak, but Mary gently raised her hand, asking him to let her finish. "With love, everything is possible. Miracles happen when you truly love," she said, "without anger or bitterness, just a quiet conviction. And the one who showed he wasn't able to care was you, not Carl. Money isn't everything in life. True value lies in who stays by our side in difficult moments. A dense silence followed. John seemed physically struck by her words, his face pale. His eyes now reflected the painful understanding of someone who finally grasps the true cost of their choices. "I understand," he finally said, his voice almost a whisper. "I think I always knew it would be this way since I saw you in the restaurant. I just needed to try." He rose slowly, like a much older man, the weight of defeat visible in his shoulders. At the door, he stopped to look one last time at Mary and the baby. "He is beautiful," said John with unexpected sincerity. "You deserve to be happy." And he left, softly closing the door. Carl sat down next to Mary, gently embracing her, respecting the emotions she was certainly feeling. "Are you okay?" he finally asked. Mary nodded, surprised by the truth of that statement. The encounter with John had closed a cycle, allowing her to release the last traces of pain she still carried. Months passed. On a sunny afternoon, Mary and Carl were in the small garden of the building. Michael, now almost a year old, was taking his first hesitant steps under the watchful eyes of his parents. Carl had brought a small cake to celebrate their dating anniversary. Life wasn't luxurious, but there was a richness that no bank account could measure. "Sometimes I wonder if he found peace," commented Mary, watching Michael trying to reach a butterfly. "I hope so," replied Carl, intertwining his fingers with hers. "Everyone deserves to find their path to happiness." Meanwhile, miles away, John was watching the sunset from his lonely mansion. The walls displayed his professional successes, but there were no signs of human connection. Recently, he had anonymously donated to a new oncology wing dedicated to young women with cancer. "I understood too late what really matters," he murmured, as the last ray of sunlight disappeared, leaving him in the shadows. Years passed. The small apartment that once housed so many moments of joy and overcoming was left behind, replaced by a modest house on the outskirts of the city. It had a larger garden where Michael, now 6 years old, could run freely, and a small veranda where Mary designed her architectural projects. Her name had gained recognition in the market, specializing in accessible spaces for people with special needs, a passion born from her own experience as a patient. Carl continued as a nurse, but now coordinated the volunteer program at the oncology center, training people to offer the same support that he once provided to Mary. On weekends, he taught carpentry to underprivileged children, teaching them to build small objects with their own hands. His philosophy was simple. Creating something from nothing was a way to believe in possibilities even when everything seemed impossible. Little Sarah, the couple's second child, just 2 years old, completed the family. Born without complications, she was living proof that doctors don't always have all the answers, that there are miracles science still cannot explain. On the 4th anniversary of the Oncology Center, Mary was invited to be the keynote speaker. In the packed auditorium, she shared her journey without bitterness or resentment, focusing only on the importance of emotional support during treatment. At the end of her speech, she publicly thanked the anonymous person who had funded the new wing of the hospital, allowing more women to have access to advanced treatments. In the last row, discreetly, John observed. Hair completely grey now, deep lines marking a face that had learned difficult lessons. He didn't come to be recognized or forgiven, just to witness the good that had indirectly been born from his misguided choices. He had found purpose in funding cancer research, becoming one of the country's largest private donors. It didn't fill the emptiness in his life, but it offered some comfort. When everyone stood up to applaud Mary, John saw Carl approach the stage with Michael and Sarah. The family hugged, an image of genuine love that made him smile melancholically. He left before they could notice him, leaving behind only an envelope at the reception desk, addressed to Mary, containing the deed to a plot of land for building a support house for families of cancer patients. That night, as she put her children to bed, Mary felt a strange sensation of coming full circle. From her greatest pain was born her greatest joy. From abandonment, she had found belonging. From rejection, unconditional acceptance. "Mom, are you happy?" asked Michael sleepily as she adjusted his blanket. "Very," replied Mary, kissing his forehead. Because I learned that true happiness isn't in the things we have, but in the people we love and the good we do. Carl watched from the door, his heart overflowing as he contemplated the family they had built together, not with bricks and mortar, but with compassion, courage, and an unwavering faith in the human capacity to rise from one's own ashes. Did you like Mary and Carl's story? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment where you're watching from. Oh, and there's another story waiting for you here on the screen. Click there and I'll be waiting for you.